Hare Krishna students. So let's begin our new session today. So first of all, let us discuss the syllabus that we have and what are the books that we have to study. For your study purposes, there will be two books. One is Part A, Employability Skills, and the other is Database Management Applications. These two books, for your P1 syllabus, we are going to study Part A, Unit 1 and Part B, Unit 1. So we are going to study these two lessons for your P1 syllabus, and if you have any doubts, please don't forget to ask your doubts regarding this chapter. So we will begin our chapter with Part B, Unit 1. So this is your book's content. So Unit 1 is database concepts. So here we are going to learn about databases. In class 10 you learned a little bit about databases. Here we are going to learn a little more about databases. So let us begin our chapter over here. So the unit says concepts, right? So what is the meaning of concepts? That means we have to understand something. There are some typical words, some values we have to understand about. So specifically, what is a database? Now, whenever we are thinking about storing some information, where do we store our information? Each and every one of us have smartphones with us, maybe laptops or desktops, and maybe different kinds of computers or different kinds of communication devices. So why do we store our data? We store all the media files, all the pictures and other things in our phone. So therefore it has a storage. Now whenever we are talking about, suppose, a data of a student, where are you going to save that data? Is it in a mobile phone or in a computer? Of course it could be a computer, but we require a specific way to store the data in a proper structured manner. We have to understand the word structured, that it must be kept in a proper structured manner, and then only it can be used properly later time. So we can retrieve those data. If required, we can update and even delete the data. So in that case, table is one of the best ways of storing such kind of data. Now tables also do have limits. Even if we are thinking with the software point of view, Microsoft Excel is a very good spreadsheet software. Even there are different counterparts like Google Sheets, LibreOffice Calc, OpenOffice. So there are different ways, different softwares that can store data in a table. But what about retrieval? After storing, what if I need to summarize some kind of data? I need to create a report from the data. So what can I do? In all those cases, database comes in. A database helps us to prepare a proper report, even create a user interface so that we can properly enter the data, and when required we can always get a report from the data. So At this point, in each and every point in our life, wherever we have data to be stored, we have database management software, also called the Dbms. Now what it does is, it helps us to manage the data and retrieve or extract useful information out of it. Now in the previous classes, you have heard me say this, that the difference between data and information. So practically speaking, these words can be used as synonyms, but technically speaking, these are completely two different topics. Data are raw facts, just raw facts that do not have any kind of meaningful thing in it. We cannot understand raw facts. If I give you some values, do you know what are those values? I gave you some, maybe a calendar month, a calendar, and I gave you some values. You don't have any way to understand those values. Those values could be maybe rainfall data, maybe humidity data, or maybe temperature data. So therefore, it is very difficult for us to understand raw facts. But when we process the data, after processing the data, after arranging the data properly, sorting the data properly, removing the duplicates, what we get is, we get information, that is useful data. In other words, raw facts are useless, information it's useful. So therefore, a database helps us to store the data, to process the data, and give us information about the data. So these are some things that we would be learning from this chapter. Now for example, it is given example over here that there is a data with test marks of all the students. Now average, maximum and minimum marks in the class can be used as indicators of the performance of the class. So what we need is, this is something called information. Now what we need to extract? We need to extract the average, we need to calculate the average, the maximum marks and the minimum marks. So this is the processing. The students have given the exam, got the marks. After getting the marks, it is the task of the teacher to sort it out in this way. Who got the highest marks? Who has the highest average marks in different subjects? What is the minimum total marks and what is the maximum total marks? So in this way, it is possible to calculate the performance of a class. So a database software or a DBMS can help us in doing such work. We use databases. There are lots and lots of spaces where database is used, starting with a school, a college and a university, where data is stored, the student data is stored. A school requires to handle all the student data, starting from the admission number, their parents' details, their siblings' details, their contact numbers, and so many other things. Even this goes for the university also, where the data must be kept properly to generate roll numbers for your admit cards. So there are numerous ways where database can be used. Think about a library where all the information of the books are kept in a database. Think about a hospital where a patient's data is kept properly, where the doctors, when required, can easily retrieve all the data about a patient. They can get a history of the patient from there. if the patient has been admitted regularly or maybe from time to time, a patient will have a history. From there, a doctor can always look into the history of the patient and they will be able to treat the patient properly. So therefore, it is something that we use regularly in our life. Now, if we talk about searching data, yes, we can always find data in Excel. It is very easy to find out data in Excel. Now, what about finding data in a database? Now, suppose you want to find out the number of students, those who got above 80% of marks. Is it possible to sort out the data in Excel in such a way? It is possible. Definitely it is possible. By using filters, we can do so. So why use database? Now databases have different ways of answering such questions. Database has an object called query that we can use to find such answers. Even when our queries are not optimized properly, our database optimizes our queries and helps us to retrieve such information very quickly. So therefore, there are always advantages of using a database above using a spreadsheet. So therefore, a Dbms is a package where all the data is stored. Now, so therefore, how can we define a database? We can define a database as such that it is a collection of data. We can call it related data. It is kept in an organized way and we can always query it. So therefore, we can describe a database in this way. Now let us discuss some of the properties. So a database is always something that is equivalent to the way our world works. Suppose in our world we have lots and lots of data, but when grouped together, those data become meaningful to us. In database, we can store the information of students, where with a click we can get all those information. Hence, all the information that is available in and around us, it is also available in a database in a proper structured manner. So therefore, a database is always useful to us. Now, when we are working with a specific database, think about the database of Aadhaar. Everybody has an Aadhaar number, and every day new citizens are being registered into Aadhaar. So therefore, what happens? When Aadhaar was being built maybe 10 years ago, that time it was a very small database, and now it is a huge database with huge data, with biometric data along with some pictures, signatures, a huge amount of data. So that database is particularly built for holding such kind of data, and it can be of any size. definitely its size is going to increase a lot. Its size is going to increase a lot with time, and whenever it increases, it requires a lot of space, and hence sometimes it can become very complex. But the good news over here is that as everything is computerized, it is very easy for us to update the data, remove those data, and even create new data. So more or less, database is actually a part and parcel of our life. It is used everywhere, every place. We just don't feel it, but it is used everywhere. Now, so let us discuss some of the needs for a database. So usually, whenever or before a database came, data was stored in traditional files, and data was stored in different forms, in simple words, in form of files. Now, for each and every task, there were different programs that programmers had to create. Maybe to insert some data, a different program, another to delete, another to modify, another to retrieve. And what if for retrieval cases there were multiple programs? Suppose in some cases student's name and address needs to be fetched, and later on name, address, and marks of a student needs to be fetched. So in that case, a new program had to be developed. So this was a very much of a problem for those systems. And let us take an example of sales and payroll departments of a company that is given here. Now it says that one user will maintain information about all the salespersons in the sales department in some files as file 1, and another user will maintain details about the payroll of the salesperson in a separate file, say file 2, in the payroll department. So what happens over here is that the sales department has an application program, and it is using that application program to store the data in file 1, and there is another department, there is a payroll department, that is using another application program to store the data in file 2. Now the thing is that the contents of both the files is more or less similar, because it is storing the data about the salesperson and along with their salary. So at this point, having two files with the same data, it is causing data redundancy. That means duplicate data. What it does only a waste of space. That is completely waste of space. Why do we need to keep the same information multiple times? Now one thing against this is data inconsistency. Suppose the address of an employee changes, but a person in the payroll department does not change the address. So in two different files there will be two different addresses. So this is going to create inconsistent data. Now whenever we would like to integrate data, that means we would like to combine the data from both the files, it is going to be very hard, because these two files are being accessed by two different applications, and these two applications may or may not be compatible with each other. Hence, what happens? There is a lack of data integration. These data files are completely independent of each other, and we won't be able to access, or we won't be able to integrate these two files together. Now, these are some of the very simple problems that a traditional file processing system faces, and a database removes all these problems, and along with it, it gives us a lot more advantage, and we'll be discussing all those points. So therefore, what does a database do? A database keeps a single point of entry where the data will be kept once, and it can be maintained and accessed by different users. It can be changed by different users, and when required, the data can be integrated from everywhere in a database. So let us now start database management system. So what does it say? It says that it is a collection of programs that enables users to create, maintain, and use a database. So therefore, a database management software can contain multiple databases, and those multiple databases are completely unique to each other. They are not going to interfere with each other. So a database helps to create a repository of data. What is the meaning of repository? Repository means a space to store the data. Now, once the repository has been created, now it can be accessed by different users having different access levels. Now, what is an access level? Suppose there is an admin user. An admin user or an administrative user can access the database whenever they need, and has full access to the database. Whereas a salesperson does not have access to all the data. They have a limited visibility. So therefore, a database can control the accessibility of an user depending on their post they are at. It can always handle such kind of data. So let us now move on. So what is the Dbms environment over here? Now, in the previous case, we saw two different application programs were accessing two different files. Here, as we can see, that there is a single heading called application programs. That means there can be any kind of application program that is accessing the Dbms software, and in turn the Dbms software is storing the data in database. So therefore, there can be any application program that can use a centralized database. We just need to create a database, and that database is supported by all kinds of application programs. So therefore, if an user is using application program 1, it is not going to affect a second user who is using application program 2. So it is completely different for different users. So let us now discuss what are the options or the operations that can be performed on a database. So defining the database, of course, here it means that how the data is going to be stored, what type of data is going to be stored, what are the constraints or rules and regulations that are going to be applied on that data. Next is populating the database. Of course, it means storing the data on some kind of storage medium. It can be a hard disk or it can be a server space, and specifically it is controlled by the Dbms. The next one is manipulating the database. It actually means modifying the database. After storing the data, data can be modified, data can be retrieved. We can query the database, we can ask questions to the database, and the database is also going to help us to generate reports. Sharing the database. Of course, multiple users can share the database, multiple users can use that database, and as I said earlier, they may have different access levels or they may have same access levels. Protecting the database. Our database can be protected from a software or hardware failure and unauthorized access. If we keep multiple copies or multiple backups of a database, if the main system fails, we can always retrieve data from the backup. To restrict unauthorized access, what we can do is we can always put an ID password to the user. We can allow an user to have an ID and a password through which they can log in and they can only access their own parts. Next is maintaining the database. Now, as I said earlier, that a database with time can increase. Now, when I am saying that it is increasing, that means the storage is also increasing. Extra storage can be added and the database can be scaled to a larger space without any changes to the database, without any changes to the architecture of a database. It is just going to adapt to that particular environment. Some of the examples of DBMS are MySQL, Oracle, DB2 IMS IDS. These are some of the examples, and one of the most popular databases that is used in maybe in regular offices or small offices is Microsoft Access. It is a DBMS software that helps us to store information and it's very user friendly. Let us discuss some of the characteristics of a database management system. Self-describing nature of a database system. So what it says? It says that it not only contains the database but also the description of the data that is stored. The description of a data or data about data is called metadata. Now what is metadata? It means the description of a data, that is what kind of data is being stored, how much space does it require, when was it updated last. Such kind of data is stored in a metadata. Now every database has a data dictionary or a database catalog where such metadata is stored. It contains the structure of the data and the rules and regulations, the constraints that are applied on the data. Now what does this constraints means? Suppose just think about the mobile phone, mobile number. Every mobile number is 10 digits. So whenever an user is inserting mobile number in a database, it must be restricted to 10 digits. So this is a restriction. So this means it is a constraint. So therefore, this kind of constraints are also stored in a database. Now, it says insulation between programs and data. Exactly. That means The outer world does not have any influence on the database. The programs do not have an influence on the database. The data is stored completely separately somewhere else, and the structure of it does not need to change if there is a change in a particular program. A program is being developed by a programmer, and if they have to adapt, in simple words, if they have to adapt to the database is not going to change according to the program is going to change according to the database. Hence it is called program data independence. Whatever software is being programmed, the database is completely out of its touch. The database is not at all going to get any kind of problem with the database or with any program. Next, sharing of data. A database is always, or a DBMS is always a multi-user environment. Just think about the Aadhaar database. The Aadhaar database is used in banks, in post office, and even getting registrations in different places. So therefore, Aadhaar data is being accessed by different users simultaneously even. So a DBMS has something that we call concurrency control software. Now what it does, it allows simultaneous access of data in the database without any inconsistency problems. So the data will not have any kind of inconsistency, and it is also going to allow multiple users to use that same database. Now let us discuss types of users of DBMS. That means who are the users of a DBMS. The first of all are end users. Now we are simply called users also, which use the database for querying, that is asking questions. We want to modify the data, we do some changes to the data, we generate reports as there are, whatever the need is, according to the need we generate reports. We are specifically not at all concerned how the database is working, how the database has been designed, what are the data types that are given in the database, why are we using this kind of structures. They are not at all concerned. They are simply using the DBMS to store, retrieve the data. Next comes the database administrator. In simple words, he is the administrator of the database and the DBMS. Now, a database administrator is a person who is able to allow the access to different users. They can monitor the users, what kind of data they are accessing, what are they updating. Each and everything can be monitored by a DBA. They also can provide technical support in some cases. Maybe some users are facing some issues in a database. A DBA can help them to get out of those issues, get out of those problems. So therefore, they provide technical support. If there is a need to get more specialized software or any kind of hardware, they get this done. Next we have application programmers. Now who are application programmers? Application programmers, they write application programs, or in simple words, they create softwares that are able to interact with the database. These programs are written in high-level languages, and we use a database programming language called SQL, also called SQL, to interact with the database. Using SQL or SQL, we can use or we can extract information from the database. The last one we have is a system analyst. Now, what does a system analyst do? They determine what an end user requires and they give some specifications to meet these requirements. So a system analyst helps a DBA to design the database so that the DBA has an idea what are the technological perspective, even economic perspective and feasibility perspective. Let me just give you an example regarding this. That suppose a database is being built and the analyst has found that currently we have certain amount of storage available and this amount of storage would be available for at least 1 million users. So therefore the analyst at this point would not suggest to buy more space and more processing power for the database. So at this point they are thinking about the economic part also, that actually we do not need such amount of data to such amount of space to store. And regarding feasibility, that whether or not the application or the database that is being built, is it possible to build such a database? The analyst is going to answer such questions. Now, what are the advantages of using a Dbms approach? Now, the Dbms itself explains, means whatever we have studied till now, it self-explains the advantages, like reduction in redundancy. That means everything is going to be stored in a single place and not each and everywhere, so a single data can be accessed by everyone. Improved consistency, we need to only update a single data place of data. There are no multiple files over here where data needs to be updated. Once we update the database, that it is going to reflect in all the application programs that it is connected with. Improved availability, the same information is going to be available to different users. We don't need different application programs to access the same kind of data. So this actually helps everyone or the database administrator to share information about various users in the database. Now the security has always been improved regarding this, that users require proper access rights. If they do not have proper access rights, or maybe if they do not have proper login ID password, they won't be able to access the system. So these are some of the issues that can be really improved in a database. Next but not the least, it's user friendly. As I said earlier, that MS Access is such a DBMS software that is very easy to access. We can very easily modify the data, delete the data, and in those cases a regular user with a very minimal training can use Access. Everything is self-explained. Just put the mouse pointer to that place and the command is going to be explained to you. Why use this command rather than using a hardened database like the MySQL, where usually we do not have any kind of user interface other than a command line interface, where each and every command needs to be typed in a command line, and until and unless a user knows those commands to access the database, to create a table, to create a report, unless a user knows all these kind of commands, it is not possible for them to access the database. So these are some of the advantages of a database. Now, what are the limitations of a database? First of all, high cost. Now, this high cost thing is applicable only when we are storing huge amount of data. Like, just think about the Facebook server that is storing a huge amount of data of millions and millions of users across the world. Now, not only it stores the basic information of a user, but it also stores all the photos and the videos and the links that are being regularly updated to a page. It shows us the memories of maybe 10 years ago we had uploaded a picture for an event. It appears in front of us that 10 years ago this has happened, 8 years ago this has happened, last year we did this on this day. So therefore, in these cases, Facebook servers require a huge amount of space to store the data, and it needs to consistently increase the amount of space. And why not? It has gained popularity in the last 10 years or so, and it has a huge user base. So therefore, its size is increasing day by day. So therefore, it has a huge cost to maintain. Now, there are other things also that we should keep in mind. That is this database available to everyone? We have to think about that, such as regarding the security of such kind of database. Now, usually unauthorized accesses can be stopped by using login ID and password. What if the server is being stolen? What if the hard disk is being stolen? So in those cases, data must be regularly backed up, and it should be encrypted so that the thieves are not able to break into the database and steal the data out of it. So therefore, passwords can be provided to the database to open. Now, there are also some physical damage that can happen to a system. There could be earthquakes, there could be fires in the server room, there can be so many other problems that can happen electronically. So in all these cases, usually the database approach is very useful whenever we are thinking about a lot of data to be stored. But in cases where there are only very few, maybe a few hundred of data to be stored, in those cases we can avoid using a database. And so this is the only reason here is that reduction in cost. Whenever we are using a database, we have to remember that it is consuming a certain amount of space. Maybe that certain amount of space that it is asking for is much less in a different spreadsheet software. So therefore, it is completely depending on the type of use. I am developing an application that stores the fingerprints. Of course, I need a database in that case. So these are some of the advantages and disadvantages of a DBMS. So for today's class, we are going to study up to this much. In the next class, we will continue with relational database management system. Please go through the video multiple times. If you have any issues, you can ask me. Thank you.